because it will impact inflation. You will remember from many discussions that we had in the past, services was a dominant factor in core inflation in particular. And services is predominantly fueled by wages. It's a labor-intensive activity, much more so than the production of goods. But in services, labor-intensive, labor matters, wages matters. So we have to anticipate that. We have to try to take into account where wages are heading, because it does have an impact on services and the price of services. So when we see, if you look at the work and the studies done by Madame Goldin, for instance, who has recently been attributed Nobel Prize in Economy, if you look at her work on the replacement of the working population and the decline of the fertility rate around the world, but in particular in advanced economies, you have to worry about how the labor factor is going to impact wages, which itself will determine the price of services, which is critically important for inflation purposes. Now, why do I explain all that? It's to tell you why we believe that the tense labor market, because of the rarity of the supply of labor, is something that we need to look into. And yes, we do study that and we do publish on these matters, but in so much, not because we want to say to propagate, support and advocate immigration, but simply because we look at what is there and we see that between the aging of population and the diminution of the working population, something needs to give, if I may say. Now, artificial intelligence might be part of the answer, robotization might be part of the answer, but it probably will not be sufficient in order to reduce the rarefication that we see. Thank you.
C'est bon, Monsieur Papier.
Juste un rajout. En fait, donc je vous rejoins sur le fait que vous soulevez un vrai problème. Certes, eh bien, au sein de nos pays, on a ce vieillissement, mais si l'on souhaite que les gens fassent des enfants, on peut aussi agir sur la confiance, sur les aides sociales. Il y a une foule de choses à faire. Donc quand on fait un choix plutôt que les autres, bien, c'est un choix qui n'est pas seulement financier, c'est aussi un choix philosophique. C'est peut-être un peu cela qui est gênant, c'est-à-dire qu'on ne se situe plus dans un cadre simplement financier. Voilà.
All of that is your assessment and very correct in many ways. The problem we have as economists is that we have to look at temporality. And if you have babies now, they will hit the labor market in 20 years' time. And what we see at the moment is shortages that will last for a certain period of time. And we have to find the remedies now in those 20 years' time. Thank you.
Thank you. For Renew, Stéphanie Oncourtin.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Madame la Présidente, chère Madame Lagarde, c'est toujours un plaisir de vous accueillir ici au Parlement européen. Et malgré un contexte géopolitique instable, marqué par de nombreuses tensions et crises autour de notre continent, l'inflation s'est stabilisée et dans cette tempête, l'euro démontre sa solidité. Sur ce constat, j'aurais 3 petites questions. D'abord, pour commencer, faut-il craindre les pressions trumpistes ou trumpiennes outre-Atlantique sur la Fed et dans quelle mesure cela affecte-t-il la crédibilité et le travail de la BCE pour garantir la stabilité des prix en Europe? Ensuite, quels moyens la BCE met-elle en œuvre pour préparer les citoyens aux futures crises? Je prends par exemple la récente recommandation de la BCE de conserver une petite partie, une petite réserve d'espèces chez soi, des questions qui ont été pas mal posées chez moi notamment, chez nous en Normandie. Et enfin, le renforcement du rôle international de l'euro reste un objectif stratégique, mais il se heurte souvent à de nombreux obstacles, et vous l'avez dit, notamment comme l'union de l'épargne et de l'investissement non accomplie. Et dans ce contexte, l'éducation financière constitue un levier important. Et j'avais suivi avec intérêt la conférence de la BCE sur l'éducation financière qui s'était tenue cette année en mars. et à l'occasion de la Journée internationale des femmes où plusieurs banques centrales ont présenté des initiatives très concrètes déployées sur le terrain. Et selon vous, comment la BCE peut jouer un rôle actif pour promouvoir cet agenda d'éducation financière auprès des États membres et des banques centrales nationales, puisqu'on sait que c'est quelque chose qui est à la main des États? Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup pour toutes ces questions précises. Alors, so the first question you have relates to the independence of the Fed. And I will simply say that from both the literature on central banks, from the expertise and the experience that have been gained over the course of time, I would say in the last 40 years, by central banks, it appears very clearly that an independent central bank can do a better job in relation to price stability than a non-independent central bank. I will not mention any particular country, but I can think of a few where the central bank is not independent and where the fight against inflation has been far more difficult than in other places where the central bank was independent. So I very much hope that this independence will be preserved. It is not without the accountability that goes with it. So it's perfectly legitimate that I come here often, address your questions, be available for all the letters that you care to send with questions to us. But at the same time, to be able to resist the pressure of governments in particular, of the fiscal authorities, in order to not monetize the debt is something that is clearly important. The preparation of citizens to crisis. So, okay. In my good Normandy, I also heard quite a few questions about this. There was a study that was conducted by our economic department and which gave rise to a publication in the form of a blog, if I recall, or maybe it was, no, it was not a blog, it was actually a publication in the Economic Journal. So it was a serious study that was eligible to publication in the Economic Journal of the ECB, which really looked at, across the board to all member states to see what the reaction was in case of crisis. And it was pretty obvious in all those countries that had faced crisis that the first thing that people wanted to do is to have cash available. The first thing that they wanted to organize was to go to the ATM machine or to any cash point to get some cash. And I think there was also a study that was conducted in Spain at the time of the major flood, which prevented the functioning of many of the ATM machines, where the Central Bank of Spain in the various provinces had to organize the delivery of cash, of banknotes, because people wanted to have banknotes. Hence, the recommendation at the end of that study that really looked at practical real-life cases to people to always have, I think they said something like 70 to 100 euros available, because it's really how much you need for about 72 hours, which is the period of time that was considered in the study. But because it touches on banknotes and because it touches on cash, it becomes very emotional. So that study, which is otherwise, like so many studies published in the Economic Journal, would not have raised any eyebrows, suddenly became the story of the day. And it was on many radio, talk show, and, why should we keep some banknotes? So that's the genesis of it all. Your third question on the reinforcement of the euro. You are right. It is a national central bank responsibility. It's a government responsibility to upgrade and beef up the literacy in financial matters. And I'm very proud that many of the central banks around the euro system have initiatives and take that to heart with having trainings, with having workshops, roundtable, and really to propagate this sense of investment and the appetence for risk. We as ECB do not do that directly. We encourage. We have a platform where we consolidate all the best practices, all the experiences of the National Central Bank, and that's how we give an incentive to them to continue doing the same effort. We will come back on March the 8th, 2026, to, take stock, see who has done what, and make sure that we progress further. So there will be new initiatives. Thank you.
Our follow-up, mais très rapide.
Follow-up très rapide, merci pour vos réponses. Sur l'euro numérique, qui est une initiative que nous soutenons également, je voulais rebondir juste sur l'intervention de ma collègue Tinagli dans le prolongement de sa question. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous préciser en quoi l'euro numérique contribuerait à la stabilité financière en cas de future crise ?
Je ne suis pas sûre que ça contribuerait nécessairement à la stabilité financière. Ce dont je suis sûre, c'est que ça n'aggraverait pas l'instabilité financière. On a fait des études très précises sur les conditions dans lesquelles, avec le plafond qui est envisagé et qui a commencé à être discuté et qui le sera à nouveau avec vous, on n'a pas une aggravation du risque d'instabilité financière dans l'hypothèse d'un choc qui concernerait telle ou telle banque. Il n'y a pas du tout ce risque-là. Et on a fait vraiment des études qui portent sur des seuils, des plafonds beaucoup plus élevés que ce à quoi on arrivera, je l'imagine.
Merci. For the Greens.
Mais, oui, je veux juste ajouter une chose, c'est que ça n'aggravera pas l'instabilité financière. En revanche, ça permettra une meilleure inclusion financière. Et ça participe aussi à la stabilité. C'est-à-dire que le fait que toute personne bancarisée ou pas bancarisée puisse utiliser l'euro numérique est un facteur de stabilité.
Damian Voslega.
Yes, thank you, President, for being here. I mean, it seems a lot of governments are falling over the question of how to deal with the narrowing fiscal space that they have. And I mean, the 12-hour French government is, I guess, no exemption, but there's also a German one that fell over a very small fiscal space discussion and others. So I think my first question is, given the zero growth, the demographics that you talked about, the increases in pension spending, I mean, what does your scenario analysis look like in terms of the risk of an actual fiscal crisis? Is the first question. Then, when you look at your interest rate decisions at the moment, what role does the refinancing cost for national debt play for you and the sustainability of these debts? You mentioned the safe asset. That would be my third question. Like, what role does European debt play in this regard? And is it really useful if we then spend it 1/3 on agriculture and 1/3 in cohesion? Or like, how could we set up European debt in a way, a safe asset, that it would contribute? And then maybe just as a last question connected to this is the international role of the euro that the colleagues have also asked about. It seems that Trump really wants to get rid of that role, also because he believes that the demand for the dollar is too high compared to the exports that are existing. So wouldn't we be harming potentially our export to other non-euro denominations nations because we keep the value of the euro too high and therefore make our products more expensive?
Gosh, you have a whole range of questions, huh? So on the no, but they're all really interesting as well. So on the issue of fiscal space, I think first of all, we're not at zero growth. Huh? That's
sorry, it's a German perspective. I'm sorry.
Well, even German growth is not forecasted to be at zero. But if I look at the euro area, my forecast for growth in 25 is 1.2%. So we're not quite at potential, but we're getting close to that. So there is growth. It's not as much as we would like it to be, but there is growth. So there is increased spending that has been decided by several member states, and some of them, as I said earlier, in response to a previous questions, there is that sort of paradox of having to comply with the fiscal governance, what used to be the Stability and Growth Pact, and the requirement to honor the commitment under NATO, and more if necessary, in order to guarantee the security of people. So I think that's a question of the focus of the investment, if it's investment in security, in the infrastructure that is needed to convey and transport and ship military equipment necessary for security, you are effectively investing in the future of the country. You are hopefully improving the competitiveness, and you are also responding to international commitment. And there is probably no escape to that. At the same time, clearly, the countries have to comply with their fiscal governance objectives, and they have to give, they midterm projections to deliver on the commitment to, for some of them, reduce their fiscal deficit, for others to arrive at the agreed deficit, which is negotiated with the Commission. That is going to be a process that will unfold in the years to come. It's not something that is going to be a static moment, a static observation, but it will unfold over the years to come. And interest rate obviously has an impact on the service of debt. You asked me about that question. Interest rate, I'll remind you, went from 400 basis points, where it was a little over a year ago, down to 200 basis points. We have cut 8 times in order to arrive at a rate which is today, when I look at my inflation outlook and the balance of risk, when I look at the underlying inflation, when I look at the transmission, we are in a good place, as I have said repeatedly. So the disinflationary process is over, we are in a good place, and we intend to stay in that good place and to do what is required to stay in that good place. Interest rate determines the service of debt. And this is something that the very indebted countries are realizing, in the sense that it increases the percentage of debt service relative to the percentage of other expenses. You asked me about safe assets. I mentioned in my introductory remarks the project of safe asset in relation to defense, which is by essence a common good, where clearly it could be understood. But this is not something for the European Central Bank to decide. It's for the governments, it's for the parliaments to elaborate and to decide whether it's a project that warrants the collective endeavor. Do we want to defend ourselves collectively? Are we one single region that abides by the same principles? And if so, is it legitimate to have defense bonds, for instance, that would be European ones? The only reason I mention it is that I think it is relevant in relation to the strength of the euro. It will be difficult to have a dominant currency, such as the euro, if, number one, we do not have the capacity to defend ourselves. So the military might, the defense capacity is going to be important. And number two, if we do not have a deep and liquid capital market, which is generally defined ab initio by a safe asset. The reason why the US market is so deep and liquid is because the treasury bonds are massively liquid and available. We're talking about 30 trillions.
No? Okay. For ESN, Siegbert Röse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will speak in German. Madame Lagarde, auch nochmal vielen Dank für den Dialog heute. Also wir sind ja naturgemäß etwas eurokritisch eingestellt, aber es war heute früh eine gute Debatte, eine gute Diskussion, dafür auch vielen Dank. Ich will anschließen an eine Frage von heute Morgen an Frau Claudia Buch. Es geht um Klimapolitik und Preisstabilität. Die EZB will grüne Investitionen fördern, etwa durch günstige Konditionen oder bevorzugte Sicherheiten. Durch solche Großprojekte wie der beschleunigte Ausbau von Energienetzen oder Infrastruktur treiben kurzfristig die Preise. Damit geraten sie aus unserer Auffassung in einen Zielkonflikt. Das eine soll Investitionen stützen, das andere Inflation dämpfen. Wie kann die EZB in dieser Lage glaubhaft Preisstabilität sichern, wenn ihre eigene Politik gleichzeitig Preisimpulse verstärkt? Ist das nicht ein Beleg dafür, dass Klimapolitik, falls überhaupt, in die Verantwortung der Regierung gehört, andernfalls das Ziel der Preisstabilität selbst gefährdet? Wenn man mit Blick in die USA schaut, die sind ja von diesem Thema völlig weggekommen. Also unter Umständen ergeben sich da auch noch Wettbewerbsnachteile. Jetzt bin ich auf Ihre Antwort gespannt. Vielen Dank.
Well, what I can tell you is our mandate, our mission at the European Central Bank is price stability. And we have defined that price stability as the objective of 2% symmetric medium term. And we will do whatever is necessary in order to deliver on our mission. The issue of how climate change and the transition impact on our policy is something that goes through several channels. Channel number one, we need to understand how climate change is going to impact prices, whether flood, drought, additional cost for transition, failure to insure goods that are exposed will actually have an impact on price. That's one channel. The second channel relates to the valuation of risks. And that was more a story of the past in the days when we were purchasing corporate bonds, for instance, when it was appropriate to determine what was the additional risk, exogenous risks, that was included in the price of the bonds and whether they were properly priced or not in order to decide how much was in our balance sheet. I'm saying that it's a story of the past because we do not purchase corporate bonds anymore. We do not sell them either. We let them run their course through their maturity, and then they gradually, over the course of time, exit our balance sheet. The third channel through which it impacts is in relation to the value of collaterals in exchange for which commercial banks are extending credit. And for that, again, we have a methodology which has now been approved, which is not yet in place because we are waiting for certain publications by the Commission in particular, which helps us define what is the value of collaterals, what kind of haircuts or what kind of reduced value is associated with an exogenous risk that relates to climate change. I hope I addressed your question as well as I could.
Do you want to follow up? No?
Ja, doch. Madam Chair, have another question? Can I starting? Okay. Also in German, zum digitalen Euro. Der Kollege Cipollone versucht uns das ja aus Sicht der EZB nahezubringen und beantwortet sehr viele Fragen, auch interessant. Also auch ein guter Dialog mit ihm. Die EZB, Madame Lagarde, verspricht beim digitalen Euro Bargeldähnlichkeit und Privatsphäre. Gleichzeitig bestätigt sie, dass alle Transaktionen über Zahlungsdienstleister abgewickelt werden, Limits gelten, KI-gestützte Prüfmechanismen vorgesehen sind und so weiter. Damit ist die technische Möglichkeit zur Filterung oder Blockierung von Zahlungen real aus unserer Sicht. Wie kann die EZB glaubhaft versichern, dass eine Infrastruktur die Kontrolle ermöglicht, einerseits niemals zur Kontrolle genutzt wird und dass ein staatlich kontrolliertes digitales Geld am Ende nicht genau das Gegenteil seiner Versprechen bewirkt? Dankeschön.
You're going to take me out of my depth because that's also a construction issue, and it's a construction of the technology that will produce two things which seem antinomic but which are not. The first thing is that obviously anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism, know your customers have to be respected, have to be part and parcel of the process. And most of that will be under the direction and the supervision of the banks. The banks will have to continue playing that role. The second aspect is that we want as much as possible to protect the privacy of our European compatriots so that the data, the information is as restricted as possible in order not to expose their personal data, their information, where they spend their money, because this is not of any interest to the ECB, which has no incentive to monetize those data. So the construction will have to navigate between these two imperatives. One, making sure that there is no money laundering, no financing of terrorism, and that the customer origin is well known. And number two, protect the privacy of citizens, because that's a promise that the digital euro will be almost as private as banknotes. Not quite, but almost as private as banknotes. Thank you.
Thank you. Second round of question. 1 minute for the question, 3 minutes for the answer, and I will start with Marco Falcone for EPP.
Thank you, Chair. Parlerò in italiano. Madame Lagarde, cari colleghi, la BCE è una banca indipendente e tale deve continuare ad essere, come sancito dai nostri trattati, ma la Banca Centrale Europea deve essere anche responsabile davanti ai cittadini europei. E qui in Parlamento, grazie ai costanti dialoghi che abbiamo instaurato con lei, Presidente Lagarde, si rafforza quel controllo democratico che è essenziale affinché la BCE sia una forza motrice per la crescita anche della nostra condizione socio-economica europea. Purtroppo la situazione attuale in generale non ha questa crescita così forte, così come ci aspettavamo, ma ancora è debole, e anche la nostra considerazione sulla non voler tagliare i tassi di interesse è certamente, come dire, ci lascia perplessi. A questo punto io le chiedevo, per volgere al termine, se era immaginabile nel prosieguo un taglio di tassi di interessi, e concludo, Presidente, rilanciare la politica di acquisto dei titoli e, ultima cosa, anche offrire nuovi prestiti agevolati alle banche per rimettere nel circuito economico denaro e quindi crescita. Sorry.
Grazie mille for all your questions. So, I'm delighted to hear you say that central bank independence is very important and is associated with our responsibility to the citizens and our accountability to you who are representing them. Very important. So I think that, as is provided under the treaty, government leaders should not interfere with the business of the central bank. We have a square mandate. We stay within that mandate. We are accountable, and we have to honor that responsibility, but the independence should be respected. And I think that that applies to all member states. Now, weak growth, we would like growth to be better, yes, but I don't want, I heard the zero growth. We have growth, which, as I said, is 0.7% for the first half, and we are still anticipating growth in the second half of 2025. Probably not as high as the first half, but our forecast is for 1.2% growth, which is on a par with an average growth that we had in the past. So not at potential yet, but on our interest rates, I think we have gone out of our way, and I've repeated many times, and I'm very happy to repeat it again. In the current circumstances, and given the tools that we're using and the level of uncertainty in particular that still abound, we are data dependent, and we will remain data dependent. We will decide meeting by meeting whether we are in a good place, whether we need to use the tools that we have in order to stay in that good place. But I'm not going to give any rate path, nor, of course, tell you if and when and how that rate path will evolve in the course of time, because that would be totally inconsistent with what I say about us being data dependent, with us being a little bit more sophisticated in referring to the inflation outlook with a good study of the balance of risk. Because I would just, undermine completely the method that we agree to apply in the future. And I just want to remind you as well, we have cut 8 times, and we brought interest rate from 400 basis point down to 200 basis point, where it is now in that good place. Thank you.
Thank you. For the S&D, Eero Enaluoma.
So, Madam President, may I thank you for your presentation today and also your speech in Amsterdam last Friday, which was an interesting one. In Amsterdam, you stressed that whilst you agreed with simplification efforts, you said also that the goal is not to relax rules nor undo what has been achieved. And this is, of course, a very important message. We know that here is a very hard bargaining situation, how to make sure that we have enough capital for the investments needed, but at the same time, how to make sure that we are not jeopardizing the stability of the financial markets. Here, it was an interesting opinion expressed by Mr. Pedro Mercado, member of the supervisory board of the ECB, and he expressed his fears that the Commission latest proposals could have gone a little bit too far in reducing capital requirements for more complex transactions. I would be interested to hear your viewpoints. What is the possible impact of these proposed capital reductions?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you very much for paying attention to the speech in Amsterdam, because it was a speech in honor of Klaus Knot, who had served as head of the DNB for, I think, 18 years, of which 14 years as head of the bank. And because he had spent all his professional life at DNB between monetary policy and financial stability issues, because he was head of the Financial Stability Board, I focused my speech on those two aspects. And in relation to financial stability, I made the point very clearly that while we had an imperative of simplifying by eliminating duplication, by reducing excessive layers of data provision and declaration and disclosure, at the same time, we could not possibly dilute the resilience of the banking system. That was point number one. Simplification, no dilution, maintain the resilience of the banking sector, which, because of the capital ratios, which are much higher now, because of the liquidity ratio, north of 160 percentage point, is giving us that stability and that strength, which we didn't have pre the global financial crisis. The other point that I made during that speech is that there has been a proliferation of non-banking financial intermediary, the NBFI, which, despite the effort of Klaus Knot as head of the FSB, are not yet as strictly supervised and regulated as the banking sector, which is fine. They're not banks exactly, and they're not subject to the same imperatives. But where I said it's not a question of reducing the banking supervision and regulation in order to reach the level of the NBFI, it's the other way around, increasing the regulation and supervision applicable to NBFI so that we arrive at a platform that is more consistent. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it is going to have to be converging towards a safe environment. Now, in relation to complex financial instruments, there is work that has been done by the Commission, by FISMA in particular, on which we have given views and opinions, on which we are beginning to see speeches here and there as well. And I think the principle that we have is that we welcome an improvement of the regime that is applicable. We welcome simplification, but it should not be at the price of taking so much risk that sophisticated, complex instruments are not subject to appropriate capital in order to back it in the balance sheet of those that issue them. And I wanted to pick up on the point that was made by Mr. Falcone as well, because you referred to the loans that are granted by banks. And I think that we are not seeing in the bank lending surveys that we conduct on a regular basis any restriction on the part of banks to extend credit, nor any restriction on the part of the corporates, in particular, mortgages as well, but the corporates that seek credit. So interest rates does not operate as a deterrent to the extension of credits. Thank you.
Thank you. For EPP, Ms. Doherty.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I didn't realise you were coming to me that quickly. Madam Lagarde, first of all, can I thank you for the attention that you pay to this committee, because I think I find it really, really valuable to have these conversations. I'd like to ask you about securitisation. For over a year now, securitisation has been, the big upcoming initiative to revitalise Capital Markets Union, now the SIU. And there are many opinions, obviously, of it. Some people feel that it's going too far. Other people feel that it doesn't do enough to incentivise the investor to look at Europe in a competitive securitisation market. I'd really love to know what your view is, and also if you could comment on how or if the ECB sees its role more generally in supporting deeper and more efficient European capital markets through the use of securitisation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. As you know, the Commission has proceeded to issuing proposals on securitization, and the European Central Bank generally welcomes those proposals. I think we have, I'm going to give you the exact points on which we have issued some reservation or qualification, if you will. So we support the fine-tuning, maintaining sound prudential requirements, and that to us is key. So we support targeted improvements to the securitization framework, enhancing market functioning and risk sensitivity. Changes need to incentivize, and those are important, a simple, transparent, and standardized securitization market to preserve prudential soundness and financial stability. So whenever you see the STS, that's what we mean. We support this simple, transparent, and standardized securitization market. And, we believe that the Commission tries to seek this balance by making capital relief proportional to resilience of securitization positions. We generally support the introduction of the concept of resilient transactions, but calibration of the proposed changes to the capital framework for banks may go too far.
Thank you. For PFI, Nico Giori.
Thank you so much, Madam President. My first question would be concerning the international role of the euro you were speaking about, as there is a window of opportunity for strengthening the euro as an international currency. Is it compatible with the Commission plans to mobilize the frozen Russian assets? How do you view that? My second question would be concerning the digital euro seen by the non-Eurozone countries. Do you think, how can you relinquish fears for monetary sovereignty of these countries? And finally, I know that you are quite skeptical concerning simplification of financial services regulations. I'm a strong advocate for simplification, and I think we are doing too slowly. So, could you tell me your arguments why you are quite reluctant, as far as I know, ECB has concerns concerning this further simplification? Meanwhile, all my interaction with the financial sector is that they would like to simpler and fewer rules. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Everybody wants simplification. You want simplification. I want simplification too. You ask the banks, they want simplification as well. But at the end of the day, when things turn out sour, we have to be here and make sure that the citizens are protected. So the concept of simplification is very welcome. And it may well be that over the course of time there has been an abundance and a proliferation of issuance that were not all necessary and that can be simplified. That may very well be the case. So because we want to be helpful, we have set up within the Governing Council of the European Central Bank a high-level task force which is under the chairmanship of my Vice President, Luis de Guindos, that has representatives from a number of the national central banks at the table, and they're going to look at three categories of things, essentially. One is the capital and the level of capital and whether the number of buffers is adequate, whether it should be simplified, how it should be simplified, how it should be maintained and at what level. And I would observe at this point in time that the capital ratios that are in place at the moment are certainly one of the reasons why we have gone through shocks that have not damaged the financial system that we have at the moment. The second, one of the aspects that the task force will be looking at as well is the supervision, to see yet again if in terms of how supervision is conducted, there can be room for simplification, bearing in mind that supervision is one of the key attributes of something like the SSM or the supervision authorities at the national level, in order to make sure that the rules are respected, that the decisions that you make here in this Parliament are effectively in place at the local level. So simplification, yes. We will convey those information to the Commission before the end of 2025, and then it will be for the Commission to make some proposals, and I'm sure that some of it will come back to you. You mentioned the role of digital euro for non-euro area countries. And as we had discussed earlier, for that to be available and to be usable in those non-euro area countries, there will have to be an agreement between the central bank of that country and the euro system. And obviously, the issue of monetary policy, of sovereignty of the currencies in the non-euro area countries will be looked at and will be carefully weighted by both parties. You finally asked me the relationship between the role of the euro as an international currency and the Russian asset debate that is ongoing at the moment. Suffice to say that we very much expect that any scheme that is discussed and eventually introduced at some point in time will be done in accordance with international rules, with international law, in order to respect the rules by which we expect our partners and our opponents to abide, and that we should be respecting ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. For Renew, Billy Keller.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation, President Lagarde. The US Fed and the ECB, I suppose, have taken divergent views on their approach to stablecoins. The governor of the Fed believes that the issuance of stablecoins is an initiative of the private sector, and that it should be US dollar backed. And I suppose that was primarily to incentivize or encourage the demand for US government bonds. But I suppose in contrast, the ECB has taken a very cautious approach to stablecoins, and you raised issues of concern around financial stability. And I'm just wondering, while the United States and the Fed encourage stablecoins and issuance backed by the US dollar, is it possible that this could undermine the EU digital currency in terms of internationalization of the Eurozone, of the euro dollar, or the euro, I should say, due to the fact that it does take a little bit of time for us to assess the technical details that are still being worked out by the ECB, the legislative process that's going through the Parliament, and in the meantime, the US could be moving very rapidly ahead with a stablecoin. So have you concerns about potential undermining the internationalisation of the digital currency?
Well, thank you very much for your points. First of all, I would observe that this is not the Fed that has taken a view as to whether stable coins or digital currency or CBDC would be the appropriate support of this digital money. It is actually an executive order that was taken very early on in January, if I recall, by the President of the United States, that essentially decided to ban CBDC in order to probably encourage, as a result, the development of stable coins in the United States. The second point that I would observe is that about 99% of stable coins today are US dollar denominated, and that the framework that has been put in place under the Genius Act actually supports the acquisition of short-term treasury bills in order to act as a guarantee to the issuance of stablecoins. So you have a whole ecosystem that has been set up in order to support the development of stablecoins. We have adopted a different approach because way back in 2020, we agreed and thought that a digital euro would be appropriate in order to respond to the demand of our compatriots who want to have cash in a different format, in a digital format, in order to just be in sync with the demand of our European compatriots. When you look at the development of e-commerce payments, when you look at how in some countries cash has significantly reduced in terms of use, it is incumbent upon a central bank to say the central bank money is still here and acts as an anchor to the commercial money that is otherwise developed by the banks. So that's the logic that we adopted at the time.